Thank you for tuning in to the COVID interviews. My name is Gabriel, and with me here today is my partner, Zifeng, and we will be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on innovation. We are grateful to have with us today Ms. Sophie Matter, who is a partner at Linklaters. Ms. Matter specializes in cross-border corporate transactions and advises on corporate transactions and financial sponsor deals across Southeast Asia. She has specialized expertise in the financial, consumer, and technology sectors. With 21 years of practice, we look forward to hearing Ms. Martha's perspectives on how COVID-19 has impacted innovation. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Martha.
That's a pleasure, Gabriel and Tifeng. Very happy to speak with you both.
Right. Firstly, we will first be covering the future of work as a lawyer. So, Ms. Martha, how has COVID-19 changed the way you worked?
Well, the first change is right here, this backdrop that you see around me. This is not my usual office, but rather is my home office. So I think the most obvious change is that we are all working from home right now. And I think if I think about my practice, how that has impacted, if I look at it in two buckets, one is vis-a-vis clients and the other one is vis-a-vis managing my team. And from a client perspective, surprisingly, that has really not been affected much, largely because the kind of work that I do is very cross-border. So it's very rare that I'm in the same country as my clients in any case. And so the work has carried on by phone, by video call, and so on. And in fact, about 6 weeks ago, we signed a deal where it was one of the first signings that I'd done. And I think that what we've experienced just now with that little technical difficulty is really exemplifies the realities of working from home. Fortunately, Gabriel and Tifeng, we were having a very pleasant conversation. Imagine if there had been a negotiation and we were at a very tense moment and then the thing had dropped out, life would have been very difficult indeed. But I'll pause there just to make sure that you're back online. I was saying before our technical interruption, which I think Gabriel and Tifeng are going to masterly splice together, that is indeed one of the challenges that we have because technology is not infallible. And I think one of the jobs that we have as lawyers, particularly what I do on the M&A side, it is negotiation, sometimes in very sensitive situations. It's very hard to do that when you haven't been able to build up that rapport in real life. But that is on the negotiation side. I think in terms of drafting the documents and quite a lot of, for example, the advisory work that we do, that has continued on apace. And I would say that other than the occasional video and sound glitch, the bigger challenge for me has really been in managing teams. Because when you do cross-border M&A, the way my team does, it is really a team sport. And we have large teams of people of different seniorities and often of different legal specializations, and we're really trying to pull together a seamless product for the client. And it is possible when you've been working with a particular team for some time, you don't feel the distance as much, but when you're trying to onboard new team members, when you're working with a new combination of people, that is really challenging. And I think that in our profession, because the legal profession is still very much an apprenticeship, that is still the model by which we train young lawyers. And I think that this remote working has really put that to the test. So we've had to be a lot more deliberate and mindful as to how we train people. Because it used to be that apprenticeship can be a little lazy because you take it for granted that the junior, your trainee who's sitting in your room is picking things up by osmosis. Whereas when now we are working remotely, that osmosis doesn't work anymore. You do need to take that extra effort to make sure that you're explaining to people and you're making sure that people understand. And I think that one of the other challenges is that our profession is an extremely demanding profession from a mental health and a physical health perspective. And, when I walk around the office, I'm a big believer in management by walking around, they call it. And when I walk around the office and I see that one of my associates hasn't gelled his hair exactly the same way as usual, that's usually a sign that he's a little bit stressed. And I can say, hey, how are you? I can't tell that anymore. Even when you're on video, not everyone is sort of dressing for work as they used to. I appreciate that you both have very much made the effort today. Thank you. Those kind of verbal, subtle cues that help you manage a high performing team, it's very hard to replicate that when you are on video.
So we'll move on to the second question. So, Ms. Martel, I understand that your company has been able to capitalize on technology and go digital. However, do you think more local and international law firms will begin adopting work from home practices even after COVID-19 ends?
So, short answer, absolutely, for two reasons. One is that the office as we know it is dead. I'm not saying that I'm going to cancel the lease for my office right now, but I think what's going to happen is that people are so much more mindful about what an office is for. Because if we talk about a place just to do work, I think many people have demonstrated that that can happen anywhere. But what do we really need the office for as a place so that the team can come together? And I think we'll be using it a lot more for team building, for times when face-to-face is absolutely necessary and when it's helpful, and for experiential training. Because again, training, you do a lot of it right now by podcasts, by webinar, and so on. So how do you make it worthwhile for people to show up for training? By making it experiential. And similarly, when you think about why do you need your team in one place, and because it will not be just the default for people to be in one place, you will actually make the most of it. The analogy that I think of is how a lot of retail stores, they've actually made their stores about experiences, because the fact of buying that part of it, you can do online quite easily. So similarly, the actual drafting of your documents, say, for us lawyers, you can pretty much do that anywhere. But what is it that you need to be in the office for? And I think that one of the challenges that we've had in this time of COVID is how do we replicate that water cooler conversation? Because that is not to be underestimated as a way of not just team building, but disseminating information, know-how, knowledge. And before all this happened, it's always interesting to see what Facebook does in terms of moving people, because right now they are one of the first people to say, hey, if you choose to work somewhere else, you can do that and we'll change your salary to reflect where you are living. But actually, not too long ago, they were rejigging their offices to make sure that the way people walk through the offices, people from different teams will meet each other, because that whole idea of cross-pollination is really important. And I can't tell you the number of times where that has been relevant, even in my work, because people often assume that us lawyers, we sit there with our, I was going to say textbooks, but I guess now we say, whatever's online with your online resources and your kind of researching. But actually, when you have a truly difficult legal problem, I've often gotten inspiration talking to my banking partners or my capital markets partners or my disputes partners. We're really kind of thinking about a solution that is very holistic, and those conversations can happen really quite organically. So the challenge is, in a working from home environment, how do we replicate that water cooler conversation?
All right. Thank you, Ms. Martel. And then considering the extreme, do you think there would ever be the notion of a virtual law firm in which office space is the use of office space is truly minimized and then almost everything has gone digital?
I think that is already starting to happen, But then let's think about what it is we can truly digitalize, right? Because you talk about, um, the law firm of the future that Susskind talks about. And a lot of it is very much around, people not physically having to be together. And I think that now that we are not able to be together physically, we're really seeing the good as well as the bad from it. So the good part of it is that people are realizing how much is possible. So even before COVID happened, at Linklaters, we were always trying to promote more agility. Agility meaning you choose how and when you do your work as long as it meets the client demands. And a lot of partners were very skeptical about it. It was very much kind of, I don't believe people are doing work until or unless I see them in front of the screen. And that naturally leads to a bit of a FaceTime kind of culture. And we were very keen that that's not the kind of culture that we wanted in our organization. So we were pushing agility. And people said it couldn't happen. And COVID has demonstrated that it can, because we've been forced to do it. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, we've seen that it doesn't solve all problems, because it's not as simple as work from home and then your work-life balance problems are solved. So I think that, and I talked earlier about it being important sometimes for things to be face to face. So if we talk about a virtual law firm, I think there will certainly be quite a lot that can be done virtually, but there will remain things that require a high touch and a face to face. And I think it will also depend on the kind of work that you do. So there will be matters that are more sensitive, say sensitive commercial negotiations or sensitive disputes, where actually getting your instructions from your client face to face is going to be very important to truly understand the dynamics of the situation. So I think that people are just going to get smarter about things, and there will not be a default we must be in the office, nor will there be this fake utopia of we can all kind of work in a park somewhere. But we will be a lot smarter about what actually works for us as individuals, for the business, and for the client, and find some medium that incorporates these different aspects and ultimately is a flexible solution.
Thank you, Ms. Martha. So in this aspect, do you think that work from home arrangements will improve the work-life balance for lawyers?
So that's the million-dollar question, Jifeng. I think that, as I mentioned a little earlier, what we have learned is that working from home is not going to be the silver bullet. And in fact, we have also found that actually certain people have great challenges working from home, and it hasn't been an entirely positive experience from a mental health perspective. I'll tell you why. For many people, keeping a separation between their home life and their work life is very important to them, because then they switch off. And for many people, and I would say myself included, you had a deep internal switch that when you log off at the end of the day, you get into your taxi and you go home, my brain starts shifting from work mode to home mode. I haven't had that in 4 months now. So for the first few months of working from home, I felt like my brain never switched off, because my commute was walking out of my study and walking to my bedroom, all of 5 steps. And even as I say those words, I realize how fortunate I am to have a study, to have at least a space in my home which is separate and which I can use as my workspace. There are many of us who are not that fortunate. And a lot of people also discovered that this challenge for working from home, I think another benefit is that people have realized that it's not just about parents with young children. Because one of the things that we did was, when we started working from home in the office, we spent a lot of time talking to our associates, talking to our people, kind of saying, let's be very open. What are the challenges people are facing? And, there was one associate who said, my mom keeps on coming in to talk to me, because she says, you're on leave, right? You're not at work, so you can hang out with me, you know. And there are people also with elderly parents, there are people with pets, you know. Life comes in all shapes and sizes. It's not just people with children who have that challenge. So I think that that was actually quite an eye-opening thing for people, and it was helpful for people to recognize that was the case. So I think that was I've dealt a little bit with the challenges from working from home, but there have also been benefits, because actually it's been amazing for me to every day at 3:45 p.m. I go down to the bus stop and pick my children up, and I bring them up, and I have 20 minutes of chatting with them about their day, usually them complaining about something or other. But that 20 minutes a day is very precious to me. It's not possible to have done that while I was in the office, but actually, do you take a 20-minute break in the office? Yes, of course you do. You go and get a coffee, you go to the water cooler, whatever it is. But being able to take that 20 minutes and then spend it with your kids has been quite special. And people have been able to, you know, do whatever they want to do with their 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be with a kid. So I think that flexibility has been a real benefit. And the challenge is, how do we keep the positive parts of this? How do we get away from the FaceTime culture that is prevalent in so many law firms, and take some of the lessons from our COVID experience into the real world after this?
Thank you, Ms. Mata. That was an interesting insight. And moving on to asynchronous hearings. For the viewers, asynchronous hearings occur when litigants and lawyers are able to participate in hearings across different time periods and geography. So in your opinion, do you think that asynchronous hearings will be an increasingly permanent feature in dispute resolution in the long run?
So I think any form of technology that enables a little bit more flexibility around access to justice and hearings and, you know, generally accessibility, that is only going to move in that direction. But I think that people are also going to be more alert to the way that such technologies can be abused, and it will have to, the use of that technology is going to have to develop in step with the development of security protocols to ensure that, you know, you can't have a deep fake on your hearing, and you can't, you know, falsify things, because that is, you know, clearly a concern. So short answer is yes, we're clearly going to move in that direction, but at the same time, there must be safeguards to ensure the integrity of the process.
Thank you, Ms. Mata. Now we will explore the skills that lawyers need to thrive in this age of disruption. I will pass the time to Gabriel.
Thank you, Zhi Feng. All right, Ms. Martha, so what new skills do you think lawyers need to develop to thrive in this new age of disruption and innovation?
So I don't think you need any new skills. I think that the same skills that have served us very well actually will continue to serve us well. And I appreciate that that is perhaps not what you were expecting to hear, but let me explain. One is, I think that the foundation of any strong lawyer is a strong understanding of the law. And I think that for so long, people have had this false dichotomy between so-and-so is a good technical lawyer, understands the law, but is not pragmatic. And I don't understand why there's that dichotomy, because actually you cannot truly understand the law unless you know how it applies in practice and how you can achieve a practical solution. Because for any, and I'm talking about practicing lawyers here, because, you know, there's absolutely a role in the legal ecosystem for academics, but we're very much talking about practice, right? So that basic understanding of the law is crucial and will remain crucial. And coupled with that, I think, is an intellectual curiosity and agility. And you need that to understand how that black letter law that you learn is going to be applicable in the new situations that come up. But again, I would put it to you that that's not a new skill. Because if you think about probably the most revolutionary thing in commercial law, what is that? It's the limited liability entity that is the company that has been around for however many hundreds of years. That was revolutionary. So I think that it is always the thought of the people living in whatever era they are in, that we always think that we are the revolutionaries, we are the cutting edge. But I don't actually think that's true. Because if you think about the Eurobond market, that's something that my firm Linklaters helped create in the 1970s and 80s. You know, that was also new. But to come back to your initial exam question, what are the skills? I'll rewrite your question, chaps. I won't say what are the new skills, but what are the skills? I would say, one, black letter law, 100%, you need to know it. You need to know how to apply it. Two, intellectual curiosity, because when you have all these new technologies coming in, for you to know how to apply that law, you need to have some functioning understanding of how that technology works. We don't have the luxury of saying, oh, you know, I'll leave that to the engineers. You need to know how to apply it. And three, intellectual agility, where you are able to look at things from different perspectives and a willingness to look at things in different perspectives. I would say that all the best lawyers of every generation, the judges who are sitting on our benches right now, they have all these three things as well. So these are not things that are only required in lawyers today, but it has what has always made successful lawyers.
Thank you. That's very insightful. To think that we can't really run from our foundations. And yet, the legal industry currently is increasingly welcome automation. However, there are different types of lawyers in the industry. So we usually think of like corporate lawyers and litigators. What would be the impacts of this increased use of legal technologies within the industry? And would the effects of this legal technology impact different types of lawyers differently?
So I think that the dichotomy is not really between litigators and corporate lawyers, because there's a lot of similarities in the way I see technology being used, but it is between big law, or what we call big law, the kind of firms that do very, very large scale transactions, and the firms that do smaller scale, but more essential services kind of transactions. So for example, if you're talking about doing a will or doing a basic conveyance, for many of those, that is already automated. And the changes that you need to make to those are not very material. But if you're talking about a very complicated M&A document, or even if we stick to the conveyancing example, if we are talking about buying Asia Square, which is one of my colleagues helped with a few years ago, that document you cannot get out of a document automation. So I think there's a difference between transactions that are very similar and you can use similar kind of documentation, and transactions that are very bespoke. And the technology that is open to you and the effect on legal technology is very different on those two kinds of lawyers. I think that if I go back to your original question, between litigators and transactional lawyers, then let me describe some of the similarities that both kinds of lawyers have with legal technology. The first thing is that the aim is very similar. The aim is to identify what part of your work is work that can be automated and would be helped by the use of legal technology. Helped in this context means you can do it faster, you can do it more accurately, you can do it more cheaply for the client. And which things are not susceptible to the use of technology. And that would be areas that require value judgment, that require really that human touch. So for both, whether you're talking about litigation or corporate law, in litigation, we now use programs that will sift through hundreds of thousands of documents, hundreds of thousands of emails to identify the relevant emails. Similarly, you can use artificial intelligence to support you in a corporate due diligence, but that exercise, there are lots of similarities in that exercise. The second similarity is the challenge that this kind of technology throws up in terms of training young lawyers. Because it used to be that the way you learned how to do M&A or the way you learned how to do litigation was to go through that disclosure or discovery process and then learn what was relevant and what was not relevant. And I think there's really a balance there, because I remember as a young lawyer going through 300 contracts to make sure that they had the right IPR assignment clause. And the first 3 contracts, I think I learned something. I said, okay, yep, this is what the IPR assignment clause looks like. Yep, okay, it's here. But the remaining 297, I don't think I increased my knowledge very significantly. But I had to do that first 3 to know what it is. So I think that gives you a suggestion as to how you might be able to design and think about training people so that you get the benefit of the automation without losing how people are trained. And so I would say that, you know, between litigation and corporate law, legal technology, the challenges are very much the same. The use are very, very similar. And I think when looking at differences, we're really looking at the difference between work that is quite repetitive and work that is very bespoke.
On the topic of digitalization, with increased digitalization and the advent of new technologies, some of which are all pervasive, do you foresee any new areas of law that lawyers can specialize in?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that has been one of the big surprises of my career, actually. I didn't expect that I would have the opportunity to have as much variety as I have done. So for example, I've worked with my colleagues when we're looking at digital assets, and we worked on an initial coin offering that was one of Singapore's first unicorns. And I felt like I had stepped into an episode of The Twilight Zone. Maybe you both are too young to know what The Twilight Zone is, but you can guess, because it did seem really surreal. And, you know, I think we've been through what I call a crypto winter, where people have had a little bit of a reckoning about how useful cryptocurrency per se is. But as we always expected, what's really interesting is the underlying distributed ledger technology. And we at Linklaters have just worked on with a startup that has done the first distributed bond, Bond2Value it's called, where we what Bond2Value does is that it takes a bond and it chops it into little pieces so that lots of different people can own a single bond. That's called fractionalizing, and it uses distributed ledger technology to record people's ownership of the bond. And here's a good example of something that sounds very cutting edge, you know, slamming up against black letter law, because there I was reading the Companies Act in great detail, you know, trying to figure out how we make this distributed ledger technology sit with the Companies Act, and figuring out when we talk about, you know, a debenture, a register of debenture holders needs to be in Singapore. What does it mean to be in Singapore? Is it sufficient that it's accessible from Singapore, because that's where, or does the server physically need to be in Singapore? You know, so it's still the Companies Act, but you are looking at it in ways that you never sort of imagined that you would look at it. So I think that something like distributed ledger technology is a really good example, and that is something that is only indicative of the changes that we can see happening, for example, in our financial system. And if I look at what's happening in the financial regulatory space, I did part of my training contract in our financial regulatory group 20 something years ago. And I think back on the work that I did then and what our financial regulatory group does now, and it's completely different, because what we're doing now is a lot of it is focused on fintech. So where financial services meets technology. And then we were talking about how do we sell insurance policies on a website, what are the customer care issues that you need to think about there? How does the financial regulations kind of apply when you're talking in that context? So again, it's all that good fundamental law stuff, but in packages and in contexts that you never quite imagine. And I think data privacy is another area which is really, really interesting and is, I think, as you said in one of your questions, all pervasive. And some of this is really starts to get into deep philosophical legal issues as well, because when we talk about how does antitrust law work, is antitrust law fit for purpose when we're talking about regulating the likes of Facebook and Twitter, right? Because the consumer is also the commodity in that case. And if we think about the way antitrust law is conceptualized, then how do you even gel those concepts together? And when you think about the ethics of AI, this is not purely intellectual curiosity from an Isaac Asimov book, but it's really about if the AI chooses who gets insurance and who doesn't get insurance, then you have a class of underinsured. And what we're seeing is because so many of these new technologies are pushing into areas that requires ethical considerations, lawyers are getting a place at the boardroom table in a way that we didn't have before. Because the legal issues that are keeping people up at night are not, is someone going to sue me? That was in the 80s. Now it's about, what if I have a data breach and people's sensitive information gets out there? That is what is keeping CEOs up at night. And that is something that lawyers are going to be front and center in setting the policies that help prevent those kind of crises, and are also going to be front and center in solving those crises. So you ask what areas of law lawyers might be developing into, and I've given some examples of those, but I think the other very interesting to think about is what roles, how does the role of the lawyer evolve as some of these issues become these really huge existential life and death issues for companies? Someone sues you, it may or may not be the end of the world. You have a data breach that you don't manage properly, that may well be the end of your world.
Wow, thank you. So on the topic of legal technology, in light of greater emphasis on legal technology, if you could change something about law school or how you were taught, would there be any reforms you would suggest?
How much time do you have, guys? How much time do you have? I have a lot of reforms I would love to suggest, but none of them are to do with legal technology. Absolutely none. Because I go back to my fundamental thesis that technology has got nothing to do with making you a good lawyer or not. So upping the quota of legal technology in our law schools, that alone is not going to impact the quality of legal education, of the quality of lawyering that is going to happen coming out of future lawyers. It goes back to an intellectual curiosity. when someone came to me and said, can you advise us in relation to our initial coin offering? I said, sure. And I went home and I Googled initial coin offering. And then you figure it out, because there was a time when, and it's true for any very new area, everyone is figuring it out as you go. And that's why I have such belief that if you have the fundamental right and the willingness to explore how those fundamentals can be contextualized, used, applied, then that is what you need to do. So then what would I change in law schools? I would, encourage there to be a lot more hypotheticals, and a lot more hypotheticals that are suited very much more in the real world. I would encourage a lot more silo breaking, right? So let's have a course where it's not just sitting there and contract. Let's mix it up a bit, right? Let's have a hypothetical where maybe the solution is a contract solution. Maybe it's a tort solution. Maybe actually all of this is irrelevant because there's been a massive data issue. And then let's get that mental agility going in people. Because if you have a hammer, every problem you look like is a nail. So let's equip our law students to go forth in the world, not just with a hammer, but with a whole toolkit. And let them have the practice in law school of how to use that toolkit. Because right now, you go into a contract law exam, you know the answer is going to be something about contract law, right? So
Yes.
that's the challenge that I put to legal educators and law students, get out in the real world with a toolkit.
Thank you, Ms. Martha. We will now explore the startup scene, and I'll pass the time to Gabriel.
Thank you, Zifeng. So, Ms. Martha, so how has COVID-19 helped or hindered innovation?
So it has helped innovation in that it has forced everyone out of their comfort zone. It has forced us to use technologies that we didn't feel comfortable with before. Video conferencing is a simple but powerful example, because pre-COVID, everyone would be on Zoom, but with their cameras off. So things were just not used to their full potential. So necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is also the mother of innovation. It has hampered innovation because one of the most powerful agents of innovation is collaboration and people attacking a problem together. And also, when you have a solution, actually within an organization, effecting the change management that encourages people to adopt that solution. That is the deeply unsexy but very important part of innovation. Having one great idea or one great tool, that's, yay. But actually, for that to have a difference, you need to roll that out in your organization so that there is adoption. And for there to be adoption, there often needs to be a lot of persuasion. And it's very hard to do that when you're not in person.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Martha. And then next, let's talk about startups and how has COVID-19 impacted startups?
Well, as you probably know, for startups, a very important concept has always been the pivot. Find something, if it doesn't work, pivot, right? And COVID has forced startups to pivot, and how. And what I love is the number of homegrown examples that you can look around and see for yourselves what an incredible pivot there has been. So for example, during circuit breaker, Chope, which typically, as you know, does restaurant booking, pivoted to food delivery. And Love Bonito, which started off only e-commerce and then moved to stores, they, for example, moved to have loungewear because everyone is just staying at home and no one's dressing up anymore, right? So having stay-at-home clothes and then redoubling their efforts to make their stores really experiential places. So it has affected them in that you've seen that in any crisis, there are winners and there are companies that don't do as well. And the companies that can adapt to these changing surroundings, that is going to be very key. The other interesting way in which it has affected startups is that startups have now been disrupted by the incumbents. And an example of that is Airbnb. So they were threatening to put the hotel industry out of business, but now people would much rather stay in a chain where they have trust in the safety protocols and so on, rather than stay in someone's home. And so we've actually seen the disruptor being disrupted. That's one example as well. And I think that there have also been companies that have done very well out of this. Ninja Van is an example. I don't know about you guys or the people who are listening to this, but I certainly get several Ninja Van deliveries a week. So, there will always be businesses that also do well out of this. So when we look at startups, it's not a monolithic kind of situation. There are startups that have, done well out of the situation because of their basic business model, right? The product they are looking at is something that works very well, even in a circuit breaker or in a COVID kind of situation. And then you have startups who have an ability to pivot, and that is what has put them in good stead.
How have you seen startups responding to the challenge of COVID-19?
So I think the key thing is the ability to move quickly. And that has always been something that startups have done. And that is just part of their DNA. So I think that is one very good example. But I would also give a shout out to those companies who have a startup mentality. And there is a company called Everrise. What they do is they're a customer experience business, and they run call centers for many big businesses. And when COVID happened, and they have operations in Malaysia and in the Philippines, and there were very severe lockdowns in those countries, as you may know, they actually got over 2,000 people of their staff to work from home in a matter of weeks, so that there was minimal interruption to their customers. And I think that is quite a logistical feat that they managed to do that, so looking at a situation and responding, very, very quickly to that's a really good example of responding well to the crisis.
Thank you. And now back to the legal industry. How can lawyers and the legal profession adapt and change to support emerging or aspiring innovators?
So I think that I love the way that you have phrased the question for a start, because you're talking about innovators, and I take from that we're also talking about the individuals, not just the companies. And particularly in the startup scene, a great founder often makes a great startup company. And in my team, we're very fortunate. We work not just with very, very big companies, but we've made a conscious decision to work with some great startups as well. And I confess that part of the reason for that is selfish, is because we really enjoy working for those kind of companies, those kind of startups, because you get access to the founder, the visionary, the CEO. And particularly for the lawyers in my team, you know, the young lawyers, how often do they get to speak to the CEO? When we're acting for, you know, the DBSs of the world, I don't get to speak to Piyush Gupta. You know, whereas when you're acting for a fintech startup, you do get to speak to the CEO. And feeling like you're part of that journey is an incredible feeling. And you feel that you are then doing your own small bit in supporting the startup ecosystem in Singapore. And I think that that empathy piece is really important, because this goes back to my earlier piece about silo breaking. When you're talking to a person who is running a fast growing company, she doesn't really care whether you're an M&A lawyer, you're an employment lawyer, you're whatever lawyer. She knows she has a challenge, a problem, and she's looking to you as a business advisor for a solution. So much of what we've talked about already this afternoon, I think, comes together in this question. How do you support innovators? How do you support clients? It's by having that ability to be intellectually agile and have that toolkit at your disposal. So not every problem that they show you looks like a nail because you happen to have a hammer. And I think you overlay that with a genuine empathy for where they are on their journey, a genuine interest in what their product is, what they're trying to do in their business. And I think that's how you support them.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Martha, for your engaging and insightful insights, and we really enjoyed the conversation. On behalf of the COVID-8 team, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to you for taking your time off to share your knowledge. We thank the audience for tuning in. Like Gabriel and I, we are sure that the audience has gained new and practical perspectives on the impact of COVID-19 on innovation in the legal industry. We look forward to seeing you at future COVID-8 interviews. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, and well done for taking all our technology issues in stride.